Here we are in Gibbs Gardens in North Georgia. Right here we have 3 generations of Coulters. And today we're going to talk about the way that countries move through the demographic transition model from having a very young population to middle-aged to older. And we're going to talk today about the demographic transition model. I'm Mr. Coulter, and this is Human Geography. Today we're moving into an extremely important topic in class. Unit 2 is really explained in a nutshell using the demographic transition model, which is topic 2.5 of Unit 2. So we're going to look at what the demographic transition model is and how it helps us understand countries. So first, the DTM, demographic transition model, is a model that explains the stages of rising and falling natural increase rates over time in a country. So it's going to show us what the different stages are of how countries grow and then eventually settle off. So here's a model in a nutshell. There are 4 main phases that were originally discussed, and then a 5th has been added recently. So it starts off, if we're all looking at stage 1, with the birth and death rates. So the demographic transition model shows in that yellow line the birth rates, and then the green line the death rates. The blue line at the bottom is showing the total population of the country. So we see in stage 1 that there is a high birth rate, but also a high death rate, which means the total population of the world is not growing. That's why when we looked at that original chart of world population a few topics ago, we saw that the total population of the world for thousands of years stayed pretty consistently the same. It's because they had both a very high birth rate and a high death rate. But what we see is that when a country goes into stage 2, that early expanding, the birth rate stays the same. But medicine, food, all of those things help improve the death rate, so it lowers the death rate. And then we see the rate of natural increase go up a lot. And that starts the population growing. But in that stage 2, the population starts growing, but it still hasn't reached the peak because all of the people that have children need to then have their own children. So in stage 3, we start to see that people figure out with advances in medicine and industrialization that they don't need to have as many children, but it takes a little while for the birth rate to go down. So stage 3, the birth rate starts to drop, but it still has not met the death rate. So that's where we see the biggest growth in population is in stage 3. Even though people have started to have less children, we still see, because there's a gap between the birth and death rate, and then those children grow up and have their own kids, that the population grows the most in stage 3. And then in stage 4, the birth rate approaches the death rate, which means we have very low growth or even zero population growth. So in stage 4, there's low to no population growth because the birth rate is just above or right at the death rate. So you see the rate of natural increase goes down. Now, what they've projected is that some countries have entered or are entering stage 5, which is where we see the birth rate actually becomes less than the death rate. That means that people are having less than that replacement level, 2.1 children. And so we start to see a decline in overall population. So if you're confused at all as we look through it the first time, don't worry, because we're going to go through each of the stages down here in a second. But there are a few basic things we really want to understand about the demographic transition model. Know that it includes the birth rate and the death rate. So per 1,000 people, the total population is always featured. And the natural increase is the difference between the birth and death. So it's the gap between those 2 lines. We need to understand, though, that countries move forward through the stages. So nobody goes backwards. At least historically, we've never seen a country revert to a previous stage. Once you move to where you have a lower birth rate, you typically stay at that. Thus, the model can be read as looking at a beginning, middle, and end. So stage 1 is where we all start from, and we're moving forward on those stages. So we'll start with stage 1, low growth, that we've talked about. So in stage 1, we see that we have very high birth rates and high death rates, but there's no long-term increase because both the birth and the death rates are really high in stage 1. We have no country presently in stage 1. So there are few people left on Earth still in stage 1, but there's no country presently in stage 1. So they call that high fluctuating. If you had a population pyramid of that, it would look like this right here. So you can see lots of children, very few people aging into adulthood. That would be stage 1. So it doesn't even look like a pyramid. It's really sharp at the bottom and then narrow as you get above like 30. An example of an area that is still in stage 1 would be like in the Amazon, the tribes that have still not been reached by outside society that we've only seen through drones. They don't have any access to modern medicine or modern food techniques. And so that makes them still in stage 1. But no current country as a whole is in stage 1. There's very few isolated groups that are in stage 1. Stage 2 is the high growth. So like we saw, we have rapidly declining death rates and very high birth rates still. So this is where countries are still having 5 or more children per woman, but the death rate has dropped, which means that they are having very high natural increase. Europe and North America entered stage 2 during the Industrial Revolution, so when modern medicine was invented in the Industrial Revolution. Africa, Asia, and Latin America entered stage 2 around the 50s when medicine reached out and went all around the world. But we still see a few countries in stage 2. So the pyramid of an expanding stage 2 country would look like this. It looks more like a pyramid where we have a wider base and a more narrow top. But we see that with so much at the bottom down here, so much growth happening, that those children are going to grow up and continue having kids. So we still see that the population is expanding a lot in stage 2. In 2 countries that are examples of this, Afghanistan and Ethiopia, both are still in stage 2, which means they still have very high growth. So the next stage is moderate growth, stage 3. Stage 3 is marked by the decline in birth rates as it starts to level off and people start having less children, and still that steady decline in death rates. The natural increase rate is moderate. So the natural increase is a lot less than stage 2, but we still see extremely high growth because the population that were children during stage 2 still grow up and have their own children. So population continues to grow because the birth rate is still greater than the death rate. Most European countries and North America transitioned to stage 3 during the first half of the 20th century. So let's look at the population for stage 3. So this is a pyramid of stage 3. They're in late expanding. So we start to see the bottom level off. It doesn't look like that youngest age group is always growing to be the biggest. And we start to see the population aging, but still more at the bottom. And then as you get into middle age, it starts to curve off into the top where the older people are. 2 countries that are in stage 3 to help us understand are Mexico and India. So those are good examples of stage 3 countries. And then stage 4, the low growth period. This is marked by very low birth and low death rates. So there's no real long-term natural increase. You may have a very low natural increase rate. Countries reach stage 4 when their population gains by the crude birth rate are diminished by losses of the crude death rate. So that means it levels off. And when you hit where it's almost exactly the same of crude birth rate and crude death rate, that's known as zero population growth, ZPG. Zero population growth is when you have the same birth rate and death rate. So your population stays the same, you're not losing people, but there's no more growth. So demographers more precisely define the ZPG as the total fertility rate that produces no population change. So just replacement level, which we said was 2.1 children per woman. And any population change we see in these countries comes from immigration when you have zero population growth. So for example, in a pyramid that represents stage 4, it is low fluctuating. So we see a bigger middle age than children. We start to have a lot more old people living longer in life, but still many less than the middle-aged. And then we see that the children are leveled off at the bottom. So children are leveled off at the bottom. 2 examples that we are very familiar with. We have the United States is in stage 4. It's growing slowly. And the same thing with China. China is in stage 4. They're growing slowly as well. So those are 2 stage 4 countries. And that brings us to our 5th one, the decline. So stage 5 is a declining population. It is a very new phenomenon. So it's not in the original model, but we started to include it. Sometimes people talk about stage 4 and 5 interchangeably. So they may lump stage 5 into 4, but it helps us understand that stage 5 is when the birth rate is actually below the death rate. So there is a rate of natural increase, but it is a rate of natural decrease. So it's a negative rate of natural increase. It's a rate of decrease. Countries like Japan and Russia have entered this stage. And we see stage 5 countries because they have the lowest population is either the young or extremely old, and then they have more old people at the top. So this is more like a tower where we start to see smaller at the bottom and then even all the way up. That would be a population that's in decline pyramid. And like I said, Japan and Russia, lots of countries in Eastern Europe, are approaching or have entered stage 5. So they're actually losing population. And we'll talk about policies that countries take to try to stop this from happening. So another overview, just because I know it's a lot to take in, this demographic transition model, we're going to look at the DTM one more time. Stage 1, right there, we have high fluctuating because the birth and death rate are both really high. Total population does not increase much. Stage 2, we see the birth rate continues to stay high, but the death rate drops drastically, meaning that the natural increase between the two is going up a lot, and that means that population is starting to grow a lot. Stage 3, we see the green birth rate starts to drop. It's starting to approach the death rate, but it doesn't get to it yet. And that means that the natural increase goes down, but still that population is growing and growing because the children that were born in stage 2 and the beginning of stage 3 are having their own children. And then stage 4, we see that they level off where the birth rate is just above or right at the death rate. And that leads us to a consistent population that isn't growing much. And then stage 5, we know that it's declining because the birth rate is below the death rate. Again, if you want to zoom in on this and pause it, there's lots of great information in this chart, and it has the pyramids at the bottom that represent each of the stages. Our last topic in this already very dense topic is the epidemiological transition model. So this shows what people in each stage are most likely to die from. So it's a little bit of a morbid model, but it shows what people are most likely to die from in each stage. So in stage 1 of the epidemiological transition model, it shows that stage 1 countries are most likely to die from pestilence or famine. So that's extremely infectious diseases that can be cured easily with modern medicine. It's also people starving to death, so not having enough nutrition. And the average life expectancy of those countries is only 35. So again, we said people in stage 1 most likely die from malnutrition or infectious diseases. In stage 2, we see receding pandemics, so less of those infectious diseases that are easily preventable. And we see a lot of people starting to have things like chronic diseases at a young age, like heart attacks, different things like that. And the average life expectancy during that time is about 50, so maybe a little bit more than 50. So we see people getting chronic diseases that will be delayed as we get into stage 3. Stage 3 is when you have degenerative or man-made diseases. So that's like things like obesity from high caloric diets. The average life expectancy approaches 60 or a little bit above. People in stage 3 mostly die from chronic heart issues, so long-term heart issues, or things that we've done like tobacco use or bad habits. Stage 4 is delayed degenerative diseases. And in that, the average life expectancy is 70 or greater. And so that's where medicine has gotten so good that it helps us delay things like heart attacks, cancer. People still pass away from those things, but they get later in life when that happens. So in summary of topic 2.5, we talked about the demographic transition model and the way that countries move through stages of their birth rate and death rate being high in stage 1. And then in stage 2, the death rate drops, but the birth rate stays the same, keeping them at a very high population growth. In stage 3, we see the birth rate start to drop off as well, which means the population is still growing because it hasn't met the death rate yet. But we see that the birth rate is declining. In stage 4, we see them level off where the birth rate's just above the death rate or right at the death rate, which means that they are growing slowly or not growing. And then in stage 5, we see that birth rate go below and your population starts to decline. That's the demographic transition model. We want to make sure that we're able to match the stages to the pyramids. That's going to be a big thing that we need to be able to do, is to match the stages to the pyramids. And then we also talked about the epidemiological transition model. And we went through each stage of the DTM to show what people are most likely to die of. In the beginning, it's famine and preventable diseases. Then it's a reduction of diseases in stage 2, but still we see some of them, and also things like heart disease. In stage 3, we see a lot of man-made diseases like tobacco use or poor diets, but we see chronic diseases too in that stage. And then in 4, we see them get very delayed, where we still have a lot of those heart diseases and different things like that, but people in older age are able to prevent them. The DTM is one step in understanding our world a little bit better. I'm Mr. Coulter, and that was Human Geography.